Today we're going to be learning about bearded dragon care. Bearded dragons. You can find them just about at any pet shop, including PetSmarts and Petco's, as well as most major expos and trade shows. They're probably the most common reptile in the pet trade, definitely the most common lizard, since they've taken the place of iguanas in their 90s. They're often marketed as the best beginner reptiles. Actually, I have a whole older video on why I don't really think that's the case, which you can check out with the iCard in the corner. Regardless, today we're going to be going through a complete comprehensive care guide on how you should care for these guys. Always keep in mind that when you're researching to care for an animal, you should always check out multiple sources. So don't just watch this video, go read some online care guides, go watch some other videos, just so you feel like you've had a full, well-rounded understanding of how to care for bearded dragons. Let's get started. So obviously, we can start bearded dragon care with talking about enclosures. This is a bit of a touchy subject, so you're going to hear differing opinions on this. When you start out with a young hatchling bearded dragon or something that's on the smaller end, you can start with enclosures as small as a 10 or a 20 gallon, but as they do grow, they really need to be upgraded to larger and larger enclosures. Adult bearded dragon size can rest anywhere from 10 to 24 inches, so there's a bit of a range on what your adult bearded dragon enclosure should look like. If your bearded dragon falls in between 10 and 15 inches, like this guy right here, you can probably get away with something like a 40 gallon or a 3-foot enclosure. If your bearded dragon gets into the upper teens or the 20s as far as length in inches, you really want to go to something that's a 4-foot enclosure, like a 4x2 vision enclosure or a 75-gallon tank. If you're building your own bearded dragon enclosure at home, make sure that it has both floor space and air space so your bearded dragon has enough room to roam around on the ground and to climb up and get on perches and bask under its lights. Moving on from one touchy subject to the next one, we're going to talk about substrate. The substrate you should definitely use for your bearded dragon is calci sand. Can't hold a straight face. Andrew, just so you know, calci sand is like the worst substrate you could ever use, and everybody knows it, so. Jokes aside, everyone really does have a different opinion when it comes to bearded dragons and substrates. Some people say that you shouldn't use loose substrate at all. Some people say it's fine as long as you're not using sand. Others opt for a paper towel. So there's a wide range of different ideas out there. While pure sand is definitely something you should be avoiding, I think there is a place for loose substrate when it comes to bearded dragon care. My personal favorite is topsoil. You can pick it up relatively cheaply at places like Home Depot or Lowe's Hardware. Make sure you're getting a brand that hasn't been treated with any pesticides or anything. And some people say you should go ahead and give it another round of treatment by baking it in the oven just to make sure there's no insects or parasites living in it. I've never had any problems with it personally, but if you are feeling uncertain or unsafe about it, that's always a safe way to go. A lot of people favor non-loose substrates such as tile or reptile carpet, and I think you can definitely make a case for that. I personally prefer to use something that's a little bit more loose because it really gives your bearded dragon a chance to burrow and dig around a little bit, which they have been recorded doing in the wild, so I figure it's a good option to provide if you can. If you're ever unsure as to how much substrate you should have in your bearded dragon enclosure, a solid 2 to 3 inches is always a good standard to be following. So now that we've picked out an enclosure and filled it up with substrate, it's time for us to fill it out with all the other necessary items and enclosure thingies that your bearded dragon is going to need. When it comes to the general enclosure layout, bearded dragons actually are pretty simple. There's 3 big things you want to make sure your bearded dragon has. 1, a basking perch. 2, a water bowl. And 3, some sort of hide or cover. One note about the water bowl, if you don't see your bearded dragon utilizing it a ton, that's not necessarily a reason to worry or fret about. Many bearded dragons in the wild don't actually ever drink physical water at all, and instead get all the moisture from insects and plant matter that they ingest. Many in captivity have become adapted to using water bowls, but if they're not, that's not necessarily something to worry about. When it comes to lighting and temperatures for your bearded dragon, there's 2 sorts of lighting that are absolutely essential if you want your dragon to thrive. First type of light you're gonna need is a heat lamp. The heat lamp's only job is to emit heat, so you can get these pet store branded, or you can get them from the hardware store again. You can even get something like a ceramic heat emitter that might not actually emit any light and literally just emits heat. Bearded dragons are reptiles, and reptiles are cold-blooded, so they need heat in order to maintain any sort of homeostasis, which is an internal steady state of metabolism and all their internal chemical processes. The ideal temperature underneath the basking spot is anywhere from 100 degrees to 115 degrees. I personally keep all my dragons at about 105. Now, depending on what part of the country you live and where your dragon is located in the house, there's a very good chance that your heat lamp is actually going to get too hot and is really going to start overheating past 115 degrees. So a really good way of making sure that your bearded dragon never gets overheated is employing something like a reptile thermostat. Essentially, these just have a probe that goes under the heat lamp. You set it at what temperature you want it to maintain it at, and then when it gets too hot, it'll cut off the heat lamp. Again, these are available at most pet stores or on online places like Amazon. Second type of light that's absolutely essential if you want your dragon to thrive is UVB, or full spectrum lighting. The sun naturally emits UV rays, so bearded dragons, when they bask in the wild, they're actually getting a healthy dose of this every single day. UVB, or full spectrum lighting, stimulates the production of vitamin D in the skin of your bearded dragon. Vitamin D, in turn, allows the bearded dragon to absorb calcium in its diet. So even if your bearded dragon is ingesting all the calcium it needs, if it doesn't have access to full spectrum lighting or UVB, none of that calcium is actually going to be used or utilized at all in the dragon system. With a quick internet search of metabolic bone disease in bearded dragons, you can really see the detrimental effects of what could happen if your bearded dragon doesn't have access to full spectrum lighting. You'll often see malformed forearms, kinked tails, and severe jaw overbites. So again, even though it seems weird that your bearded dragon needs any type of special radiation, it really is absolutely essential if you want your dragon to thrive and you want to be keeping it in an ethical manner. While you usually want to place your heat lamp at one side of the enclosure, your UVB should extend to close to almost the entire length of the enclosure. This way, even when your bearded dragon isn't basking under its lamp, it's still experiencing the UV radiation. Now that we've finalized your bearded dragon enclosure, we can transition into bearded dragon diet. This is one of the reasons I really think bearded dragons don't make great beginner reptiles, because they have really high dietary demands. One of the most difficult things for people to grasp about bearded dragon diet, especially when you're talking about a very small hatchling bearded dragon diet, is just how much they will consume. If you get a hatchling bearded dragon that's within, a couple days to a couple weeks, they're going to need to be eating 3 to 4 times every single day. A huge amount of bearded dragons' growth and size happens when they are extremely young, and they're usually pretty close to their full size at about 6 months old. So it's absolutely essential that they be getting not only a lot of food when they're young, but a lot of protein. A very young hatchling bearded dragon should have a diet that's 80 to 85% protein or insects, and only 20 to 15% plant matter and fruit. As the bearded dragon grows, this ratio actually shifts, and when you get to a full-size adult bearded dragon, it's actually completely the opposite, with about 60% plant matter and only 40% protein. Once you get to an adult, the amount of food they need to be ingesting actually reduces a lot. Depending on how much you feed per meal, you can feed your adult bearded dragon every day to 3 or 4 times a week. Again, the reason for that huge amount of protein, especially when they're small, is just because of how fast and how much they grow when they are really, really small animals. I've probably worked with around a dozen stunted bearded dragons at this point. This essentially just happens when you have a bearded dragon and it's just not fed the amount of protein or food in general when it's really young for it to hit those growth spurts, and after those windows have passed, it's never really going to reach that full size or even come close to it. Now we can get into what some of that protein and that plant matter actually looks like. As far as insects, you have quite a different range of different things available at your disposal, ranging from mealworms to dubia roaches, to crickets, to the occasional hornworm. There's a whole bunch of different things you should do. As far as a staple, mealworms and dubia roaches are probably a pretty good staple to stick with. The rest can be used as supplements if you're having issues with weight gain, or just as occasional treats. As far as plant matter, it's always a good idea to have a good mix of both fibrous vegetables and sugary fruits. Possible vegetable ideas range from collard greens to dandelion greens to things like squash and even sweet potato. Some of their favorite fruits could include strawberries to apple to blueberries to even peaches and nectarines. If you're ever in doubt on vegetables or fruit, variety is always a good call. If you have an adult bearded dragon and you're worried that you're feeding it too much or not quite enough, the best way to keep track of this is probably just to keep a scale on hand. Get your bearded dragon's weight once a month, and if you notice any major spikes or weight losses, then you're probably feeding too much or too little, respectively. The last important step for dietary health for your dragon is making sure you're using vitamin supplements. There's two main supplements you should be using. The first is the calcium supplement. Again, that ties in with our UVB. Remember, with UVB, we talked about how if you have calcium in your diet but no UVB, the bones aren't going to grow right. Well, the same is true the other way around. If you have your UVB lighting, but you don't have calcium in their diet or the calcium supplement, then the bones are still not going to be able to grow and develop quite correctly. Therefore, the calcium supplement is 100% essential if you want your bearded dragon to grow and develop properly. The second type of vitamin supplement you should be using is usually called multivitamin. This is an amalgamation of a bunch of other minerals and vitamins kind of thrown together, and it's just for general maintenance and general health of your dragon as it grows and develops. You can apply these vitamin supplements by dusting both their insects and protein matter and their vegetables and plant matter. Talking a little bit just about general maintenance. Many bearded dragon owners like to soak their bearded dragons often. I will do it once in a while if I feel like my bearded dragon is a little bit dirty, needs to clean, or it needs to get something out of its system. But by and large, I'm not a huge fan of bathing just to bathe because I feel like that can open up some doors for possible respiratory infections or other issues since they don't typically bathe a ton in the wild. Some bearded dragon owners trim their bearded dragon claws. Again, I'm not really a huge fan of this. It seems pretty unnecessary to me. Their claws really are not that long, much shorter than something like on a cat. And if that's like really too long for you, then maybe the bearded dragon isn't the best pet for you to be keeping. Lastly, one of the reasons that bearded dragons became so popularized in the pet trade is their amazing temperament. As you can see, this guy is being an absolute gem and totally cooperating with me for the video. The average bearded dragon will do this and is usually pretty chill, both around kids and chaos and around adults. If you are starting out with a bearded dragon that's really young, this does come with a price. You really should be working with your dragon every day if you want a dragon that's as docile and as calm and as handleable as this one is. But if you're starting out with an adult bearded dragon, chances are it's already been pretty well socialized and is pretty calm like this guy here. As far as interactions with other bearded dragons, unless you're in a breeding setting, this is probably something you want to avoid. Bearded dragons are not known to be particularly gregarious, and males in particular are very aggressive towards one another typically. So that concludes our analysis of the general care of your bearded dragon. If you have any questions or concerns about your bearded dragon, you can leave a comment down below, but if it's urgent and you need a direct response a little bit faster, email is always a better route. contact@radiantreptilia.com. I know I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'm going to go over it again. Always continue researching and developing your knowledge about a species, even after you've gone ahead and purchased it. As cheesy as it sounds, a good reptile keeper is always learning more about the animals that they work with. If you are ready to go ahead and purchase your bearded dragon, you can always head over to radiantreptilia.com to see what we have available. This snazzy dude is currently up on the site right now, or if you're watching this video a good bit in the future, we always have more bearded dragons coming and going. I'm Ethan, you've been learning about bearded dragon care, and this is Radiant Reptilia.